Alrighty. So welcome everybody to our second professional development event this year for the Australian Counselling and Psychotherapy Academics Network. It's 12 noon now in Queensland time, and really happy for those who are able to join us from across the country. Before we go into the topic, just a few housekeeping notes. So if people could keep yourselves on mute to ensure that we have a good quality recording, that would be really greatly appreciated. As I mentioned before I hit the record button, this session is being recorded and will be uploaded onto the National Heads of Counselling and Psychotherapy Education YouTube site, so that people will be able to view it, and you'll be able to also share the links or re-access it afterwards as well. Encourage people to use the chat for questions throughout the session. Is that okay for you, Shannon, or is there a different
Yeah,
way you'd like to
although
interact?
I'll probably they can list them. I'll probably save because they've got time at the end for questions, so I'll probably
Okay.
do it that way. Otherwise, there will be things that I don't get to. So I'll leave some time at the end for that,
Okay.
and we can take that, or I can take them on the fly then. Either way.
Great. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. And for those who are online, we can send you a digital certificate of attendance after the presentation. It might take me 1 or 2 weeks to do, so but just sort of flag that that's available for those who are attending as well.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'd just like to introduce the topic. So we are living in through a massive technological shift, and in my view, it's even potentially bigger than the internet. AI is becoming a staple in our world, and many of us are asking, how does a human fit in there? And how does the counselor fit in with this whole shift as well? And then we're coming to another level, which is how is counselling education relevant for the AI era, which is what Shannon's going to address. Um, Shannon, Dr. Shannon Hodges is an associate professor, discipline lead at the of counselling at the University of the Sunshine Coast. He has been in the profession of in this career of spending 40 years across 6 continents and has a very profound influence in the field, both as an author but also within various leadership roles within both the American and Australian counselling professions. So look, we're really looking forward to what you've got to say and share, Shannon. I'll just also flag his upcoming book called Taming the Lizard Brain, apparently arriving in July. Um, so, um, so certainly a veteran in the field of counselor education. So I look forward to your guiding us tonight, or today, Shannon, and yeah, handing over to you now.
All right, thank you. And my title is Counsel Education Relevance in an AI Era. And the second part of that is why we matter more now than ever. And it's really nice to be here. Thank you for asking me, Nathan. And for those here and those who might watch the recording, I shall do my best. But first, I want to start out as we do, and as we should, by acknowledging the country that I and we are on. And I wish to pay my respects to the Gabi Gabi people on whose country my campus sits on both of our main campuses here in Sippy Downs. I further wish to acknowledge all First Nations people throughout Australia. I recognize their stewardship of the land, air, lakes, rivers, and seas, and acknowledge their 40,000 year plus of history and their many cultural and artistic contributions to this nation and well beyond. I pay respects to First Nation elders past, present, and those who are emerging, and look forward to a time of true reconciliation and a more just relationship with our First Nations people. Now, one of my heroes, Viktor Frankl. Talk about him. I've written quite a bit about him, spoken quite about him, and I will do so until I can't speak anymore. So, but here's one of my favorite. He said a lot that I like. I'm a firm believer that it's all about meaning and purpose in life. I've seen that in everybody I've ever treated over 4 decades. And even if they didn't say that, that's what it's about. But here's the other thing. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our to choose our response. That's what we have agency over. So we don't have agency over the stimulus. What we have agency over is our response to it. And that's very relevant to this presentation in our new world. All right. Now, I've got this quote, and it is not meant for religious purposes. It just is meant as means of comparison. For now, we see through a glass darkly. That was said by a figure in history named the Apostle Paul, sometimes called Saint Paul, First Corinthians. But I've been thought about this for a long period of time, and a lot of historians have used that in their titles and whatnot. But there's a bit of a mistake here. The original Greek word for glass, isoptron, actually refers to a mirror and not a window. So here's where I'm going, because this is so relevant for the counseling profession. Therefore, we see events in people not so much as they are, but as we are. Okay? And yet is currently true about AI. What I'm hearing is very dystopian. And I understand the fear. Anytime something new comes up, there's going to be a lot of fear among people because we don't control the stimulus. We don't control that. We're not going to be able to control that. We've got to work with it. That's part, our agency is how to do that. So part of it is we'll be as we go forward and continue to use that, we have to figure out new and creative ways to partner with it because it's not going away. We are not going to change that any more than horse and buggy people. We're going to keep the automobile and the train out. Let me just give you a bit of story of history of my life. I was born in 1960, so you can figure out how old I am. Here was my technology, the mimeograph machine. Do you even know what that is? It was invented by Nathan's shaking his head. It was invented by Thomas Edison in late 19th century, and it was basically a way of copying. And it was really bad. It was this drum filled of ink. You'd turn it around with a typewritten page, and it would make these really blurry copies by the time you got to number 20. We were so low tech at Salem Elementary School in rural Salem, Arkansas, in the Ozarks, that we actually had a hand crank instead of an electric one. When I was in grade 3, we got an electric one. In grade 2, I remember we had this publication called the Greek Weekly Reader that we got, and it stated in this article in computers that no individual in the world owned a computer. This is around 1967, 68. Can you imagine? That was my history. I saw my first photocopier in ninth grade when our school actually bought a Xerox. And it was huge, and the whole thing moved. The top of the front would move, and it would roll. Yeah, so the secretaries they'd lock the wheels down, but it would still roll. So I had to push it back. Didn't see my first computer till my freshman year at university, and I had a friend who worked in the computer center. He was an engineering major. He gave me a tour, and the computers were as big as washers and dryers. All right, and that's what they looked like. They looked like washers in the spin cycle. My master's degree, when I started in 1985, the electric typewriter had memory. The overhead projector was what we used in class. We had computers, but they were not well used, and there was no internet at that point for commercial use. It wasn't until 1994 that I was on the internet. It was called the World Wide Web. It was my last year of my doctoral placement at the Oregon State Counseling and Psychological Services Center, and that's the first time I had email. Flash forward and fast forward to now, and I feel like I've lived through this quantum leak of technology, just like everybody, but particularly people like me who remember when the typewriter was high tech, an electric typewriter was high tech. That's the world I come from. I'm older. Some of you, it's like, wow. Unbelievable. Can't imagine without the internet. I also want to go back. Isaac Asimov. I, Robot. In fact, they made a very creative movie starring Will Smith, loosely based on his book. And he came up, Asimov wrote well over 100 books. Great thinker. He had these laws for robots. First law, a robot may not injure a human through action, inaction, or allow any harm to come to a human. The second law is a robot has to obey orders given by a human, except where such an order conflicts with the first law. That's where things get kind of twisted in the film. Third, a robot must protect its existence provided such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. And later, he added the zeroth law, which takes precedent over all three. A robot may not harm humanity or by an action allow humanity to come to harm. And in the book, which is a really interesting read, it's a collection of stories, actually. There's this central character named Dr. Susan Calvin. She's a robo-psychologist. I thought I'd misread it, a robot psychologist, but that's what she is. She's the first in the world. Now, Asimov's characters, robots, they show a surprising emotional depth and consciousness, and they think in the way. They think in the way about existential issues, which would be really hard to do. And I'm going to bring that in just a little bit. And I promise I won't just keep reading slides. So I'm going to crystal ball it. Here's some predictions. Now, the problem with seeing through a glass darkly is you get a lot of things wrong. And I'm going to get these wrongs, but when I think about it, here's some that already kind of started. I could see virtual reality, and I'm going to bring in counseling practice because it impacts what we as counselor educators do. And I don't know how to separate those two. Virtual reality type sessions where the client and the counselor can see, it looks like they're actually in the same space together, but they won't be. It might require some kind of special effect glasses or something, but not cumbersome like we have now, but something far better, sleeker. I could see that happening. All right. Or, and this is somewhat happening now, like I spent more than a decade getting up the middle of the night or staying up and taking crisis calls and being exhausted. That was the worst part of the job. But somebody calls in on crisis. An AI counselor screens the crisis calls. Yes, AI counselors. Assesses the risk and then transfers that call to a human counselor if the person is imminently suicide. And later the AI is going to schedule that person for an appointment as soon as possible. So it's going to screen, take some of the load off real life human counselors. This is a way that we can partner with them. Or, and then let's talk about as counseling and psychotherapy educators. Introductory courses at some point in the future are going to, and course content are going to be managed by AI counselor and psychotherapy educators, which is a concern, but I'm going to get to reasons why it's not going to eliminate this in a little bit. All right, and they're going to be doing all sorts of things with that they have, and it's lectures, assignment, and right now, there is a program that my university looked at with AI-generated clients, counselors, supervisors. It's not very good, but in the coming future, it will be. It's going to get better. It's just starting out. It's also going to mean like accreditors like KCRAP in the United States for programs I taught in back there, PACFA and ACA here, and others, depending on where you are. They will eventually, you're not going to like this, but it's going to happen. They're going to eventually allow an AI to human counselor education and psychotherapist ratio. That's going to happen at some point, but it's not going to eliminate us. But it's a concern to watch. All right, but here's why I'm going to start for why I'm not panicking. And it's not just the fact that I'm right at the edge of what is going to be beginning semi-retirement. Think of Carl Rogers. I didn't do Carl Rogers therapy. I did mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. Nathan was kind enough to mention my upcoming book. But in that book, while I'm using mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, mind, body, spirit, breath, all that, I go back to Rogers on philosophy because nobody did presence better than Rogers. And presence is, you got to do that to do anything else. Even Aaron Beck said, Rogers has it right that the core conditions are necessary. They're not sufficient, but they're definitely necessary or therapy's going nowhere. Like, we think we listen. Now, I want you to think about how often you're guilty of this in everyday life, because I am. But rarely do we listen with real understanding, true empathy. Generally, I find I'm listening to frame a response. And when I train students as counselors, I tell them, don't be thinking of a response. It's almost like a meditation. Block that out. Just focus totally on your client, what they're saying, their body language, their eyes, etc. Yet listening of this special kind is one of the most potent forces for change that I know. I am never going to believe that an AI is going to do that as well as a human, ever. All right. Now, I may be wrong, but I find it really, really hard to believe. Let's keep going. I want to keep talking about Carl Rogers. I talk about him more and more often. The curious paradox is that only when I accept myself just as I am can I then change. Really, it's something I think about a lot. And in Rogers' world, if you read Client-Centered Therapy and On Becoming a Person, both of which are still relevant even decades after they were published, The being is more important than the doing. If you're not present, like in that previous statement, you're not going anywhere. If you can't create trust, think of Judith Herman's triphasic model. Safety and stabilization is the first part. If you're not doing that, you're not going to be doing any treatment. You're not going to be getting them into that third stage of post-traumatic growth. Therapeutic presence is the issue. How is an AI counselor going to do that? How well is an AI counselor educator going to be able to do that? It's going to be a long time before they can do it like Rogers is talking about. Well, by the way, what would genuineness mean for an AI counselor? What would that mean, being genuine for an AI? I mean, if you go back and read some of Asimov's books and stories, you can kind of almost see that. But his robots, to a great extent, are very human. And I think not very realistic, but interesting. And then let's get to existential issues. As an AI, how's an AI ever going to really be able to understand the depth of that? All the changes we go through this life. And is that AI really going to be able to create and hold that therapeutic space for grief, for end of life issues, for somebody whose marriage is just broken up? Is that AI going to be able to self-reflect and change as per Roger's statement? I really doubt it. See, this is what we're good at, people, as counselors and counselor educators. That's what we got to focus on. Some sample realities. Ethical codes are not going to be able to keep up with AI. AI just moves too fast. It's keeping up with technology in the internet age has been hard. I helped the American Counseling Association write their previous uh, uh, code of ethics, and took us 3 years. There's no way we could keep up. There's no way we could adequately plan. That's going to be the case going through. AI counselors are probably going to be superior to human counselors at assessment. They're going to have less bias and they're going to be more consistent. Everybody's going to get the same type of assessment, but they're not going to be as good in my prediction in counseling, mentoring, and understand ethical complexities. That's going to be a real struggle for them. AI counselors have the advantage, that they're going to be unpaid. Now, it's going to cost to set it up, but after that, you're going to try and recoup your costs. They can work unlimited hours. They don't need leave or vacation. They aren't going to burn out, although they might stop working. They aren't going to need a super, unlike their human colleagues. All right? Now, then once again, the reality, Isaac Asimov, and I remember reading his books, he even wrote a version of the Bible, he even wrote a humor book. He was really amazing. He was a genius at sci-fi, but that was sci-fi. The actual AI is unlikely to resemble the robots in his books. And if it did, it probably would be the end of the human race. I don't think that's going to happen for a lot of reasons, some of which I've stated, but we'll keep going. Now let's talk about some pros and cons. As I mentioned, there's some pros to AI. They don't get sick. AI counselors don't get tired or burn out. They don't get paid. If they ever had the kind of consciousness humans did, they'd form unions and they'd be demanding. They'd probably shut the world down, but they don't think they're going to have that. They're going to be great at recognizing patterns and pointing those out to potential clients and also to the students that they're training. They aren't going to forget. Like, I know I forget now. I struggle. I know what the word is. I'm in the classroom. I can't pull it out 5 minutes later when the moment passes, I remember. An AI counselor educator is not going to have that problem. Okay, but they're going to have to make up a lot of stories. I can pull up those of you who've actually done a lot of years of counseling. You can think of relevant examples in your classroom when you're training students. And AI would have to make them up unless they've been an AI counselor, in which it's probably going to sound very inauthentic. The other thing about them is they don't sue you. All right. Now here's some cons. My university was one that just got hacked, one of a lot around the world that did, and it has caused major problems here, and including with my courses. It's been a major pain. I've been pulling my hair out all week. And when you get a power and a shutdown, you're offline. Can't do anything. They don't bring any money in then, and they aren't able to teach then. My belief, They will never be empathic in the way as a human for the simple fact that they're not human. They're just not human. They're going to be great at other things. They're going to be very poor at empathy. They're going to be very poor at human compassion. That's going to be hard to understand. It's the programming and such, even generative AI thinking, like, Asimov was thinking about it. He didn't call it, that's what he's thinking about. Still going to be really hard to do and probably impossible. It's going to be really hard for counselors to do couples therapy, relationship therapy, couples therapy, family therapy, and group therapy. It's just going to be very hard for them to pull that off. Now, one more con. AI counselors aren't going to sue you. AI counselor educators aren't going to sue you, but you could be sued for AI. Let's say your AI screws up and there's a blip in its design as it happens. And it tells someone who's suicidal, oh yeah, I can see why you'd think about killing yourself. Maybe you should go ahead and do that. I read in a fiction book, Michael Connelly, who's got Harry Bosch and he's got the Lincoln Lawyers series. That actually comes up, and it's actually come up already because somebody in a relationship with an AI girlfriend did just that, tried to kill himself. All right. So here's what I see. And I see the only viable future for us and for AI is some kind of partnership, as counselor educators, as counseling supervisors out in the field, and so forth. I think it's the only viable options. And I even put down here a possible new book for some brave counselor out there like Nathan or somebody else. Like I was thinking of Rogers, on becoming a person, on becoming co-therapist, human and AI counselors and psychotherapists. I think that would be it would be really interesting to read a book like that written by both at some point in the future and see what that's like. So in the counselor education space, you've got a book that's written part by human counselor educators and psychotherapists and some by AI, you know. And it might be, and I bet the AI might be more technically correct, as my old high school English teacher would say, Mrs. DeShazo. But it probably is not going to be as creative or as personal. And again, just to hit it, and if you'll pardon the malapropism that I'm going to say, someone asked me to describe myself some time back. I was on a panel discussion back in the U.S. I said, well, how would you describe yourself? I thought for a few seconds and I said, I'm a hopeless optimist. And so what I mean is, I'm always thinking as dark as it gets. I'm always believing as bad as things get. I'm always believing things are going to get better. That's just me. I'm always believing. I know things can get real, and I've been there, and you've been there. And I've worked with a lot of people who've been in dark places. But I know it's darkest right before the light. And so here's how I see this. We're stronger as partners. AI, great at pattern, once again, they're very fast, etc. They, in terms of no emotions, that's good and bad. They're not going to freak out, but they're also not going to be able to read cues as well. They're not going to have a consciousness. Humans, what we're great at is intuition and creativity in ways that go outside the box. And AI counselors and counselor educators are going to be well within that box. Going outside that box just isn't going to be what they're going to be good at. They're not going to understand emotion very well. I think back as a kid to the old Star Trek. Oddly enough, my favorite character was Spock by Leonard Nimoy, even though he was nothing like me, even though I was much more like Dr. McCoy, who was the foil for Spock. But together they were great. Ethics are going to be another problem for them. And understanding context is going to be really, really, really hard. I had a client many years ago in the rural Mountain West, and he was it was before we had the autism spectrum. Back then, we had autism of different types and we had Asperger's. And anyway, they wanted me to assess him because they thought should have had Asperger's, and I deferred. But anyway, I interviewed him, and he was very intelligent, great at math, and he had great phenomenal memory, but he could not understand context well. I mean, he could remember anything. I gave him I thought, he said, give me a list of words. And I gave him this long list, and he repeated it back verbatim. And AI can do that. But this young man who was just incredibly gifted in certain areas, he could not understand the context. He could not understand that at the end of the hour, I had another session, and why wouldn't I keep talking to him? I had to kind of lead him out. And a very kind and gentle guy, but just a lot of limitations. AI is always going to have a lot of limitations that humans don't have, just like humans have a lot of limitations AI doesn't have. We're better together. It's finding that golden mean for both of these, for us and AI to work together. And that's going to be a challenge for a while. I'm going to make some suggestions, and I've kept this a little short just because I want to take any questions. I think some of the suggestions I would say are fully embedding AI into counselor education and psychotherapy training programs. I do know colleagues who do not want to do this. They are digging their heels in, both here in Australia, the United States, and elsewhere. That isn't going to work. But that's where they are. I think, in terms of stages of change, if you think about those stages, they're in pre-contemplation. They're stuck back there in pre-contemplation, and I'm way down there. I'm like, okay, how do we deal with this? What do we do? Make the changes. We're going to have to, professional organizations like PACFA, like ACA, like KCREP in the United States, and those organizations, professions, and state organizations and such, and accrediting bodies, they're going to have transitional ethics, or at least part of that, so that because ethics are going to need to be fast and lean, you're going to have rapid responses. So your ethical board is going to be able to write and revise ways to stay up with technology. Instead of having a code of ethics that lasts 3 to 5 years, that's just not going to work. Okay, but rewriting an entire code is cumbersome work. But those sections, those parts dealing strictly with AI, counselor education, and counselors, is going to have to be lean and mean, and it's going to have to be very much a living document where it gets revised annually or less, or semi-annually, more like. The other thing I see, here's number three, is where I really think it can be helpful, for those counselors that you're training, that we are training, and that other people train. In between sessions, somebody who's working on social anxiety, working on improving and lessening their depression or any other kind of anxiety or their trauma, etc. They've got this little in the chat bot, or they've got this little figure on their iPhone or some other type of smartphone that's like a counselor, a virtual counselor, a virtual coach. It can help them. Okay, have you done your 3 reframes today? To deal with negative automatic thinking. Here's some that you've been doing, and reminders to do that, and ways you can talk to that bot and talk back with you and get encouragement. I think that has a very useful function. Just like I always gave homework as a good CBT guy, and the ones who did the homework, they made the quicker gains. I also knew that sometimes people didn't do homework because all they could do was just come in, and it's like one guy told me who was struggling with anxiety, said, all I can do is just come in here on a weekly basis. He said, I'm really struggling to do that. I said, okay, maybe that's my need, not your need. But I said, at some point, when you're ready and start doing maybe one of those homework assignments, and maybe we'll back it up, I would predict that you'll probably start having less anxiety. But anyway, and number four, I'm going to talk about this. I've got several. All professional counseling organizations and counselor education and psychotherapy training programs should, if they don't have it, they should establish a task force to strategize, address, manage AI issues related to education, training, ethics, and professional practice. Every organization should have that. It should be a task force, it should be a committee, it should be ongoing, etc. There's no way around that. I mean, and we just have to get with it. Again, not controlling the stimulus, but managing the response. I would suggest, and certainly I would say this of ACPA, because ACPA is a very new organization, and I think this is particularly apropos for them, but certainly for other more established organizations, accrediting organizations, etc. Annual retreats to fully assess, evaluate, and address how are we doing in terms of managing our response to AI. How well are we doing? We know we're always going to be a little bit behind. because it moves so fast. But how well are we keeping it within sight? Is it working for us? Are we able to train good ethical future counselors and psychotherapists? The other part of that is in between managing these issues, having regular online meetings to talk about how are we doing, what are our goals and all that, what are our issues, how well are we doing and so forth. And then regularly collecting and disseminating data to how we improve AI, both in the counselor education space and well beyond, certainly out there in professional practice. The other part of that is I think AI counselors are going to be great for initial intakes. I remember I had a computerized version of the structural clinical interview for DSM because in the United States, counselors diagnose, which is what we have to do. But I would have clients take that as part of the intake, and it would give me a pretty quick set of possible diagnoses. Then I would interview the person to see which one was most accurate. AI could do that. You could have AI doing a screening, and even if you've got a waiting list at your clinic, and most places I've worked have always had 2-week waiting lists, and that's problematic. But you could have an AI while they're on that waiting list. You could have an AI doing just basic counseling and check-in with those people waiting to get in, and I think that's very valid. That would be another valid way. And when space opens up, those people could see a live counselor. Now, what's going to be interesting is how many choose to stay with the AI counselor. I think most will want to see a human at some point, but it wouldn't shock me if a few did. And I would say regularly surveying, membership to address these unanticipated issues. That's the American Counseling Association doing that. That's PACFA and ACA here doing that. That's ACPA doing that too. Member. Now, I want to jump to something a little bit different, but it's very related. And Nathan has heard this from me. ACPA we need to promote it as the Organization for Australian Counseling and Psychotherapy Educators. Just like the Association for Counselor Education and Supervision in the United States, a division and related to ACA US, that's what they are, and they're a very influential organization because right now, our two peak bodies, they're really not about counseling and psychotherapy educators. They're about people out in the practice space. Now, that impacts us because we want our people getting jobs and we want good training standards and ethics and all that. But we need this organization. I would also say that NHCP will never be that organization. The membership is too small if it's just about the heads. But ACPA, you could have several hundred. So NHCPE should be merged into, in my view, not my decision, my opinion, it should be merged into ACPA as a steering committee or some kind of a leadership committee. These are the heads of programs. But it's simply too small to make much of an impact. ACA potentially could be one that grows. NHCPA is too limited. And again, like I said, consider the U.S. Association for Counselor Education, Super ACES, as your model there. There's going to be some differences because this is not the United States. It's Australia. But I'd be looking at why they came to exist in the early 1960s. And the reason they came to exist was what was then, the American Counseling Association was then known as, they had a different name, but it was, I think, American Personnel and Guidance Association. But they were, again, more about the marketplace, which at that time was mostly schools and some agencies. But that's why ACES came. That's why CPA is here. And I strongly recommend that. Number 7, never forget this. It's more important than anything else and if you don't remember anything else this old man has talked about, remember this one. What are the controllables? It isn't going to be what AI puts on or on this world. The controllable is how we manage our response to what AI does or anything else. That's always what we've got. That's always the agency. And I go back to Frankl. I want to say this. I've said this before, and so it's not something I think that's inappropriate. In fact, I would argue the opposite. I can remember, because this runs in my family. Anxiety and depression both run in my family. My mother was institutionalized for it. I've had 3 other close relatives institutionalized briefly for it. I've struggled with it. But what helped me was reading Viktor Frankl and thinking, I didn't ask to have the kind of genes that would give me anxiety and depression. I did not ask for those. Who would? But I realized reading Frankl and this famous psychiatrist, amazingly, I don't know how he stayed so positive through it. The controllables where I could get up and I could keep working out. And every time I worked out and got physically active, I felt better. And when I reframed my negative thoughts, I felt better. And so I didn't have agency over my genetics, but I didn't have to be a prisoner of them either. And it's the same way in that sense with AI. We didn't invent AI, but we do get to manage it and deal with it. Finally, Margaret Mead, famous anthropologist, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever does. And if she were alive today, I don't think she'd be saying a small group of thoughtful, committed AI citizens. I think it would be the flesh and blood Homo sapiens like we are. Now, I've thrown a lot of spaghetti on the wall, and I can see it sliding down. I'm just curious, what, if any, questions might you have? And everything related's fair game.
Just unmute if you want to raise a question or provide a response.
Hi, Dr. Hodges. Um, I'm curious if you can offer any examples from your experience as to how we can actually integrate AI into counselling education. I mean, I'm aware of things that I may do on a small scale in terms of, say, preparing course material,
Mhm.
but I'm
Yeah.
interested if you have other examples as to what that sort of integration actually looks like.
Yeah, I think it's very early. And if my colleague Katrina Andrews were on this call, she'd be saying, yeah, Shannon, listen to Shannon trying to tell you about technology, the mimeograph guy. But we had one here, I can give you an example. Now, this is not all in the classroom part of it, but it's preparatory. Katrina had showed me a couple of years ago this, and I forget what it's called. We can ask her, but she can tell you. And what it did was it took our readings and they had these two AI generated like talk show hosts, and they hit the highlights of what that reading was. And what we were trying to do was just see if because I notice on the train people aren't just reading, they're doing it with their ears, as Malcolm Gladwell says. It's not with their eyes anymore, it's with the book, it's with their ears. Now like I said, I'm an old guy. I prefer real books, but I listen with podcasts, and I notice the young people do. So that's one way that it's being done. In terms of how the technology develops in the future, some other ways in the teaching space. Here's another one. This could be done in class, for an example. You could have um, uh, two AIs, an AI counselor, an AI client, and they can show you, here's how we do crisis intervention. Here is how we do, and those are going to be better at some things than not. For example, I don't think those are going to do presence very well, but I think they can do a lot of these other interventions. Here's how we do the empty chair intervention and all these others, and you can see that. You might even have one where that I could see younger students really liking this, where they're actually interacting with an AI counselor or an AI counselor education that you've got there that you can use once technology gets a little better, and that's coming quickly. And they could be doing it that way also. Or they could get a lecture from the AI counselor educated counseling psychotherapy. Please forgive me, psychotherapy people, because in the States it's all one. So I don't mean to short you, but so the AI counseling and psychotherapy educator and they can have a conversation. So there's all the kinds of upcoming. And so, Michael, I would say that we're just ahead of it. But those are some ways. The other thing I'd say is when you start using, it's like anything else. You start thinking of other ways you can use it, you know? And I can think of other ways. Let's say you're doing distance education. That's a way of reaching somebody. Maybe you're teaching students in India or somewhere else or in Perth or wherever. And you've got an AI and you're using it in that teaching space and you're augmenting that you're supervising that AI counseling psychotherapy educator and you're augmenting some of those lectures or delivery with your own ideas and etc. Or maybe the AI is talking and you go in and you're covering those blind spots that the AI could not cover because they're going to struggle they're going to struggle a long time to field some of the questions because they're not going to understand them for quite a while. I mean, some things are just the programming goes in and what they know is the program. They might ask for clarification, but if they're not programmed, they're going to struggle to fill in those gaps. I hope I gave some help on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the example, and I have a particular interest in that use of AI, particularly in the simulation space. I'm really excited to see where we might be able to go with that. Mm. Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on what Michael just said. That simulation space for us is going to be big. I think it's going to be as big for us as it is for the medical profession. You know, I have family in the medical profession of all kinds, but it's huge for us also, you know. And that's why I'm not so afraid of it because again, they're going to need us to fill in those gaps. And it's pretty hard. You know, let's think about this just a second. I remember in my last job, because I was there 21 years, but even before then, you know, in other roles, because I'd be at my office every day, students would come in. And even though they were going to counseling and say, I just want to let you know why I haven't been as good. And I'm not going to open this up in front of you. I know that's an ethical issue, but I just want you to know I'm going to do better. Or here's what's going on, and I'll try and focus. My spouse left me, or my mother died, or whatever it was. And I'd say, well, I can understand that. And part of what they wanted from me was me not to be their counselor. What they were saying to me is, Shannon, I just want you to understand. That's what's going to be hard for the AI counselor educator. And that's one of the other reasons I think we're not going to get replaced. But again, to be partners, and those simulations are a big part of that, as well as training them to work with the AI when they go out into the practice space as well. What else, people?
I'd just like to pick up on something around the liability side, Shannon, because as we start to use AI more, whether it's in our clinical practice, our teaching practice, and when we're relying on it to be able to interact, and we send students, say, here, use
Mhm.
this simulation or use this sort of thing.
Mhm.
When we do that, we lose control over because we can't guarantee the AI is actually going to give helpful answers. We can't guarantee that it might, like especially if we said to a client, please, here's an activity, here's some prompts. You can use these in your daily life as needed, as a support, as an adjunct. But then if the AI does, give unhelpful, which they generally
Mhm.
like, this is something actually I hadn't thought about. Like I knew that we have to take responsibility for our use of AI. I'm aware of that as well. So it's this and look, I'm just thinking out loud. I imagine that given it's getting so baked into our society that the legal system will become aware of that, and as long as we
Oh,
we
yes.
we work within the best practice sort of model to maximize gain and minimize risks. But yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't actually thought about that before.
Let me piggyback on what you're saying because again, anything that happens in this world, it opens up real opportunities. Those are pro and those are con. All right, now for the legal profession, they're going to be pro. But let me go back to that. I was teaching many years ago as a PhD student back in my old doctoral program at Oregon State University. Had a student come up to me and she was clearly in distress. And I said, have you gone to counseling services? No, I'm afraid to. So why don't I walk you over there, et cetera, and so forth. And she knew I'd been practicing and she knew I was practicing in an agency in the community off campus. So we did that. I went over there and I said, I want her to see Dr. So-and-so because I knew this staff and Dr. So-and-so was really good. But they couldn't see Dr. So-and-so because Dr. So-and-so was full. So they gave this client to somebody who I think was, I forget, anyway, it was another person. And so I said, would you like me to wait or should I like you to wait? Okay. So I sat and read and did some things. She came out and she was furious. And I said, what happened? And she said, let's go outside. So we went outside and debriefed. She said he was completely incompetent. He kept talking about himself. He kept asking me, what do you think? He was having marriage trouble or so, I guess. And on and on and on. So here's the deal. We can't control what that person we refer someone to can do either. We can't, when we place a student in an agency, and I remember having I can think of a couple of horror stories of agencies that were supposedly really good treatment centers where somebody was unethical. We can't control that. So here, let's go back to the controllables. The controllables are we do our due diligence and we check things out as best as possible, but we cannot control the outcome, and that's what's hard. It's like, let me use one more analogy, and I'll turn it back. After my freshman year at University of Arkansas, I got hired to work what was called freshman and transfer orientation. It was this great job, but it meant I had like 18 hours days and putting a smile on and being nice to people all day long when they weren't always nice to me. So one time I don't know why they had me do this. I was the youngest member of this team. I think they're 10 or 11. I said, Shannon, we want you to address the parents group. I'm thinking, I'm 19 years old. I mean, kids. So get up there and I'm in front of like 300 people, parents, and I'm terrified. My knees are shaking. I've never done this, spoken in front of a group before. But I was doing pretty well once I got going. I come from a family of teachers and politicians and clergy. We're used to talking. This man raised his hand. He said, how can you guarantee me that nothing's going to happen to my daughter while she's here for 4 years? And I was stumped. I can't give that guarantee. I was trying to think, what am I going to say? I got rescued by this mom, and she said, well, I think what I'd say is Shannon can't give any of us that guarantee. We have to use the resource here. We have to educate our sons and daughters on to use the resources to make smart decisions. If they've had too much to drink, not to drive or get into a car with somebody else, or if they think that somebody's not a good person to be dating, that they stop dating. If they do, God forbid, get hurt by somebody, get assaulted, that they have places to go who can talk to them about the emotional issues and what their legal resource, and on and on and on. It's the same with us. We cannot give guarantees that we cannot give. So again, control the controllables. Focus on what the controllables are, because that's our agency. It's always our agency, whomever we are. What else? Got to be at least one other question out there that I can fumble around with.
I'll jump in again. I have not so much a question, but maybe a comment building on something you said before about, I think you were describing something like Notebook LM or a similar service that can generate, these podcast overviews.
Mm-hmm.
But what it sort of says to me is perhaps the other thing that's worth us looking at moving forward is not just how we're integrating AI into our teaching process, but how we're also educating students to use AI with not just within their studies, but within their practice ethically.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
actively integrating that rather than going, well, I know you're doing it, but we're not really going to talk about it. How do we
Mm-hmm.
actually teach you and go through those processes?
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges here is that it's an awkward, the space is going to be awkward for a while because the AI is still getting better, but it will make leaps and bounds. And then people like us who are just starting to use AI, we're going to have some time to work into that as well. And it's going to be it's not going to be a sprint where counselor ed and psychotherapy educators and AI run off together. It's going to be stumble and fumble for a while. And that's just kind of the way things are at the onset. Anything that's really new that suddenly we start using on a regular basis, it has that kind of problem. Let me go back also. When I was a doctoral student and the internet, the World Wide Web, we first started, it was really messy and it was really slow and really bad and down more than it was up. And you're looking up resources and all of a sudden the system goes down or whatever, or gets hacked. So so it's going to be awkward for a while. So, okay, we're in this new awkward phase. We just have to get better slowly and work on that in the future. Now, the other thing I want to go back to Michael's question. When these podcast lectures that AI sort of put together, which were quite clever, it's very passive learning, which means they don't retain much. The best way is when you use active learning. So in the AI, when they're counseling, let's say, Michael, you're there and you've got your students assigned to counsel. They counsel these AI generated and they're working on crisis interventions, which is what the students are most afraid of or whatever. And they're actually interacting and learning, and whatever they say are the cues and such that avatar responds to in ways they are programmed to respond. And then they're actually learning something. The same can be said for the trading space. One of the agencies in the Buffalo Niagara Falls area where I was sending students to, they had their own training program. And AI would have helped that greatly because what they had to do was regularly pull a staff member off of her or his caseload to do it, or they had to bring somebody in from the outside, pay a bunch of money to do that. The AI could take care of a lot of that. There's another example about in that space where there's a legitimate use. Yeah. So I can think, and there are illegitimate uses also, just like there are with humans, just like human counselors and psychotherapists. So one of the things, and given Michael, I'm just going by side, which my side is getting bad. I can tell you're a lot younger than me, so you're going to do this. You're probably going to do this pretty well. If I were going to be doing this over the next few years, I would probably do it pretty badly. My colleague Katrina would probably either strangle me or she'd quit. I don't know. But part of it is your own aptitude at managing that AI and working with it and becoming more facile. It's going to be a huge uplift for a lot of fields. Not ours is not there. I was just upstairs looking at the nursing space and thinking about that myself. Yeah.
Thanks, Shannon, for the presentation. I'm really enjoying your sharing of thoughts on potential orientations of counselling towards the emergence of AI. And something that I'm sitting with is this idea is the unidirectional nature of that relationship at the moment and envisaging is it a tool, and at what point it becomes bidirectional and we're co-creating and with a dynamic partner in that creation. And having seen some really interesting stuff coming out of America in the space for counselling education with avatars learning, so that they're not only teaching, they're learning at the same time. And so there's a massive knowledge set being built. So we can only expect that it is going to become more and more, in a sense, or have a felt sense of being intuitive, like having more and more capacity to draw innovatively from a range of objects. So I am share your curiosity. I share your orientation towards leaning in, but I am also really looking forward to that increased awareness of that we're moving into a co-creative dynamic space as well. Really interesting.
Yeah, let me piggyback off what was your name? I'm sorry.
It's Trudy.
Oh, it's Trudy. Sorry, my bad, Trudy.
Oh, good.
It sounds kind of like Trudy. I can't see your face. All right. Well, thanks, my colleague Trudy Plan. All right. Let me go back to what Trudy was saying, though. Yes, this is going to be a co-creative space, but Trudy also knows creative arts therapists, and there's going to she can use those avatars in creative ways, but it's not going to be quite the same as her working with some child or even an adult or someone and getting down and using that in the therapeutic space. That's going to be harder for an AI to do. The other thing, and again, this is only a Shannon opinion. And remember, I'm seeing through that glass darkly, which means I make a lot of mistakes. And I'm not a prophet. I don't see the future. I'm seeing patterns and whatnot. I still am never going to believe, and here's why it's always going to need to be a partnership, a co-created space, as Trudy Flynn says. Because AI will always have limitations, just as humans have limitations. We get tired. We need leave time. We need to sleep. We need to eat, etc. But AI is going to have limitations too. Technology is going to make some AI, outdated. AI is going to crash and go down, and I do not believe AI will ever be able to hold a therapeutic space and create it the way that we can, that a really good counselor, psychotherapist, or art therapist, or whomever, psychologist, whatever our cognate profession you want to use, they're never going to, my prediction is they will never do it as well as a really good one. They will never be able to do what Carl Rogers said you have to do in order to do therapy. And I don't care if you do an EMDR, trauma-focused CBT, or any of those other things, that I've been involved with or had colleagues in. They're never going to be able to do that as well. They're going to be limited. They can do some parts better than us. Overall, no. We have to cover each other's blind spots. Any other intrepid counselor, psychotherapy educator have one more question? Well, if not, here's what I want to finish up because we're coming right down to about an hour. I want to thank all of you for tuning in and giving up some time on Friday when there's all sorts of other temptations and fun, and when the weather is good, particularly here in Australia. There's being out there on the coast or maybe in a coffee shop or kicking back with someone more interesting than this 66-year-old here you're looking at. But I want to thank you, and I want to say, encourage something. As we go forward, I want you to look at AI not with fear. I mean, that's going to come up at times. There's a lot of fear out there. But remember, nothing is ever quite like we think it's going to be, nor what I think it's going to be. It's not going to be rolled out as in the future. And it's not going to look like, if you look back and think, you remember that guy, that Hodges guy said? Yeah, boy, he's really wrong, wasn't he? And I probably will be in a lot of ways. But what I'm not going to be wrong about is we have to control the controllables, and that's going to be building a partnership and using AI as a partnership tool. But remember, we're always going to be the senior partner in that because the AI counselor and counselor educator, they're going to have their limits. We're just like we have ours. But their limits is they're going to struggle to adapt to a lot of these human and particularly in existential spaces simply by the fact that they're not human. When it comes down to it, they're just not human. So.
Thank you, Shannon. Really, really interesting conversation that you've put on the table. And in some ways, we could probably summarize this whole thing is understand the technology and its strengths and limitations. And also there's that understand us and our strengths and limitations and work in partnership. And it was nice how you provided a suggested underlying attitude around it all, which was really around to rather than get freaked out by it or jump in blindly into it, but remember our power in the response to the stimulus. So that was something which is coming through. So we don't have to be freaked out by it. It reminds me of the thing of the Chinese word for crisis being, there's risks and opportunities. And really, in some ways, it feels like you've given us both recognize the risks, the weaknesses of AI as well, the strengths, as well as our strengths as well, which just to remind ourselves of that, given that we're hearing so much conversation about AI at the moment, that in these conversations, it can feel like the human gets lost. It feels like the human's not the focus, where the background now, AI is the foreground. And just to be able to have a map of, how the different areas AI can interact with, and then also to have some guidance in terms of, we can be AI rejectionists, or AI fully adopters, or we can try and be AI partners. And like we partner with our clients, we're partnering with AI and our colleagues as well. So I really appreciate your conversation here, and I'm sure there's lots of people are going to go away and have some thoughts around it, and it'll just deepen and help, I guess, provide some guidance in terms of how to make sense of this ever-changing world. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you very much, everybody. And let's just keep working and work on the controllables, and we're going to be okay.